It was me and my girlfriend's first Halloween together. My girlfriend made plans for us to go to a pumpkin patch, pick out our own pumpkins, and carve them together that evening. Halloween was actually the following week, but she wanted to put them in the window for decoration. Anyway, we get there, and it's a huge field that stretches way back to a wooded tree line. I'd never seen so many pumpkins in one place. First, my girlfriend wanted to visit the gift shop and have lunch at the cafe. Then we got in line for a hayride deep into the pumpkin patch. As the tractor pulled the wagon, the driver told us about the specialty pumpkins they had. I thought all pumpkins were orange, but they had white ones, grayish-blue ones, pink, green, and multicolored ones. They had real little ones and giant sizes that I hoped my girlfriend wouldn't pick because I didn't want to have to carry it back. At one point in the tour, the driver stopped and announced that we were in the U-pick section. A bunch of people got off the hay wagon, including me and my girlfriend, while a group of other people climbed onto the wagon carrying pumpkins. The driver told us that he would come through every half hour or so, and we could catch a ride anytime. My girlfriend pulled me away from the other people, heading us deeper into the pumpkin patch toward the woods. She seemed to have fun turning pumpkins in different directions, trying to find one with a flat front so she could carve a scary face into it. I went along with her, getting on my hands and knees, looking for my own pumpkin. Suddenly, she shoved me down on the ground and jumped on top of me. She was making a move on me, if you know what I mean. And it was kind of sexy. I'd never done it in a pumpkin patch. Well, after playing around a little bit, we decided to head into the woods so no one could see us. We were running through the maze of pumpkins, hopping over them, zigzagging between rows, until the field turned into tall grasses with nothing else growing there. The woods weren't too far away, but my girlfriend laid down on her back in the weeds and said that no one could see us there. I didn't argue, but before I could lay down next to her, she rolled over and was crawling towards something. Then she started screaming. She looked up at me with huge eyes, and I could tell she was really terrified. She jumped to her feet, hid behind me, and pointed to a spot in the tall grass. I was trying to get her to tell me what was wrong, but she just kept pointing and saying "holy shit" over and over again. I got down on hands and knees and crawled toward the spot she was pointing, and saw part of a shoe. I pushed some of the weeds back and saw that the shoe was attached to a person's leg. A horrible smell hit me and almost made me gag. As I got closer, pushing more grass out of the way, I saw the girl's face. It was all bloated, and her eyes were open and bulging out. There were maggots crawling out of her open mouth. It is something I wish I'd never seen, because I still have bad dreams about it years later. I got up and backed away. It was shocking. My girlfriend was asking me what we should do. She said at first she thought it was one of those gray pumpkins. So she got closer, thinking it would be the perfect pumpkin to bring home in memory of our visit to the pumpkin patch. But then she realized it wasn't a pumpkin. Anyway, I was still kind of in shock. But that helped me stay calm while I tried to calm my girlfriend down and think straight. I looked around and saw how far we were from any people and the farm. So I decided to get proof of what we saw and mark the spot close to where we found the body. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, got back down on the ground, crawled closer to the body again, and took a picture. Then I got up and tied the sleeves of my jacket around a clump of grass near the body, so I could find where the body was again. Then we went back to where the hay wagon had dropped us off. It seemed like forever before we finally made it back to the gift shop. I pulled the cashier aside and told her quietly that we had found a dead body in the pumpkin patch. At first, she laughed and gave me a weird look. I told her we were serious and she needed to call the police. I showed her the picture I had taken. She disappeared into a back room. Then a manager, or maybe the owner, came out, looked at my picture, and asked us to stay until the police arrived. The farm shut down all activity in the pumpkin patch. The cops found the body and blocked off the area. They interviewed me and my girlfriend, had me delete the photo off my phone, and sent us home. And that was it. I called the police department a few times, trying to get information, but they would only tell me they were still investigating or that they couldn't give me details. We never saw anything on the news about that body discovered at a local farm. It's been years now, but I still sometimes search the internet trying to find out who the girl was and what happened to her. Just recently, I spoke to a new friend who is also a local police officer, and she mentioned that if it was a suicide or a drug overdose, out of respect for the privacy of the family, there might never be any available public information. We never did get a pumpkin from the patch that year, but I ended up with a wife that I love dearly, and the story of a dead body that still creeps us out to this day. My wife and I used to host an adults-only Halloween costume party at our home each year. We'd usually invite around 50 people. Some were people from my job that my wife might not know. She invited coworkers from her office that I didn't know. And then we also invited our mutual friends, family, and neighbors. Not everyone we invited could come, but it always turned out to be a big crowd. Usually 25 to 30 people. Our only rule was that you must wear a costume that conceals your identity and try to stay in character throughout the evening so that no one could guess who you were. About halfway through the party, we'd have a costume contest where everyone modeled their costume. We all voted and then announced the winners. Then you could relax a little and let people know who you were. People got into it and tried their best to disguise their voices until the contest was over. It made the party more fun and mysterious. We have a large backyard that's great for entertaining. The weather this time of year is really comfortable, so our guests could freely wander between the inside and outside of our house. There were different activities set up like bucketball, which is a giant version of beer pong, cornhole, and a giant dice game. We had amazing food and like a fire going outside where guests could roast eyeballs, a skewered tongue, or a severed hand over the fire. It was real food, just doctored up in a horror theme. And if you remember that TV show Fear Factor, we had a Fear Factor food buffet with gross-looking but perfectly edible food. I actually miss having these parties. But something pretty awful happened about 5 years ago, and my wife still hasn't gotten over it. She refuses to have another Halloween party. That night, everything was going great. People were having a good time. But then my sister came up to me. I remember she was dressed as a swamp hag, but I knew it was her. She put her head near mine so no one else could hear and asked if I had set up some sound effects in the bathroom. I told her no. She laughed nervously, but told me she was really freaked out. She'd been in the bathroom with the door shut and started hearing creepy whispers and heavy breathing. It sounded like someone was in the bathroom with her. I told her I'd go check it out. I searched inside the bathroom and out in the hallway, but didn't find anyone or anything out of place. Soon after that, my wife rushed up to me and told me that some friends of ours, Mac and Jenny, were leaving. And they were pretty upset. Apparently, Jenny insisted that there was real blood in the punch. She said that, as a nurse, she knew exactly what real blood looks and tastes like. And it was not a funny practical joke. My wife said she checked the punch bowl, and sure enough, the liquid was red. But it had been a green color earlier when she'd made the recipe and set it out. So, she took it into the kitchen so no one else would drink it, and we could figure it out later. She felt bad that her friend Jenny was so mortified by it and was actually leaving, and wondered if it really was blood and who would have done that to the punch. It was kind of unsettling. But the party went on. Then I heard someone say, really loudly, "This is disgusting." I stepped out into the backyard and saw a group of people hovering over an area of the food buffet. One of them poked something around with a fork. Then they put their plates, which were filled with food, into the garbage can and walked away. So I walked over to the food table to see what was going on. Right in the center of a plate of meatballs was a gutted rat. The rat was sliced open from its neck to its tail and laid flat so its guts were exposed and kind of oozing out onto the plate. Its head was intact, so there was no doubt it was a rat. I remember moving it around and poking it with a fork to see if it was fake or something. There was nothing fake about it. Obviously, we had not put it there. Before I could figure out what to do about it, my friend Luke showed me a piece of meat on his plate. He was about to cook it over the fire, but his wife told him not to eat it. She thought it looked too real and too weird compared to the other horror-themed meat we'd put out at the fire. She was right. It wasn't our food. I brought his plate inside to show my wife. She was horrified. To this day, we're not sure what kind of animal that piece of meat came from, but it wasn't anything we had set out for our guests, or something we would even eat. Soon after that, we heard creepy laughter coming from the living room. And the words, "Someone is going to die." I found the source of the voice pretty quickly. It came from one of those teddy bears where you can record a message and play it back. It was motion activated, so anytime someone moved near it, it would repeat. The teddy bear was stashed on a shelf behind some of our family photos. But someone must have just put it there because no one had heard it earlier. By this time, word had spread about some of the things that had happened. People were leaving, most not even saying goodbye, some making snide comments about sick practical jokes that weren't even funny. When there were only a few people left, and I'd had a chance to explain that we did not do these things, they started helping us investigate. We discovered a few more things, like there was a trail of bloody footprints going from the bathroom into our bedroom, all over our bedroom. Some of our dresser drawers had been opened, and our clothes moved around. Also, one of the buckets used for the bucket ball game was filled with millipedes or centipedes, ugly-looking things that obviously we did not put there. My wife called the cops. They came out, looked around, listened to our story, but said they really couldn't do anything. They said it sounded like a practical jokester had crashed our party and asked if we knew of anyone who might be mad at us. No one came to mind. Over the next couple of weeks, we called everyone that we invited to the party, asked a lot of questions, offered explanations, and apologized to those who were there. We found out that other people had creepy experiences. More than one person heard whispering in the bathroom. A couple people discovered an eyeball floating in their drink that looked shockingly real. A few others said there were bloody handprints on their cars that they didn't notice until the next day since it was dark outside when they left. The only thing that came out of our attempt to solve the mystery was that several people noticed a person dressed up as a zombie clown who always carried one of those children's plastic trick or treat bags that looked full of stuff and didn't really socialize with anyone. I remember that guy too. I'm pretty sure it was a guy. He'd just nod without saying anything if you tried to interact with him. And he did seem to be elusive. There one moment, gone the next. But to this day, we don't know the identity of the person who ruined our party, pissed off some of our friends who thought it was us, and truly scared some of our friends with sick, disgusting prank. And we also don't know why the person would do it. Like, what was his reason or purpose? My wife is forever traumatized. And that's what makes me the most mad. The fact that this guy was walking around in our bedroom and went through her stuff still freaks her out. And she imagines all sorts of horrible things, like the guy was a murderer who would have actually hurt people, or that he'll come back someday in the middle of the night. Clearly, he was a psycho or had something mentally wrong with him. I still wonder if it was someone we knew, someone we invited. It could be someone we still know, and maybe even still hang out with. Who knows? It's hard not knowing, not having answers to the events of that super creepy night. I was in my early 20s when my buddy Joe invited me to a harvest festival in a small town about 30 miles from where we lived. He told me it was known for the absolute scariest Halloween hayrides, good bands, and cheap beer. We got there just as it was getting dark. Joe went up and got our wristbands and brought back waivers we all had to sign for the hayride. We ordered beers and settled in at a table by the stage. There were 4 of us, all friends with Joe. I remember a cute gal in short shorts that came over to offer us homemade apple pie. Of course, we all bought a piece of it and flirted with her mercilessly. When the band took a break and we were all mildly inebriated, Joe said we should get in line for the next hayride. I'm an observant person and I like to watch people, so despite having a few beers, I noticed some things that had seemed odd. First, when the hay wagon came back from its last trip, the driver hopped off and walked toward the row of portable restrooms. Then another guy, who had been standing off to the side, looked around kinda weirdly and then put on a Halloween mask. He wasn't wearing a branded shirt, like the other people who clearly work at the farm. Second, the masked driver walked into the waiting crowd, flicking a flashlight around, and tapped people on the shoulder, indicating they could get on the wagon. It was like he hand-picked us for the hayride. That didn't seem normal. Soon, there were a dozen of us, sitting on hay bales. All 4 of us from Joe's group, 3 guys from another group, 3 more guys that seemed to know each other, and a father with his son. The driver got up on a huge tractor that pulled the wagon. The engine started, and we lurched forward on a dirt trail leading into the woods. I noticed that there were only young men on the wagon. No women or kids, and I guessed none of the guys were older than 30, except the dad with his 20-something son. This also seemed kind of odd. At first, there were cheesy Halloween decorations, stuff like giant spider webs, fake skeletons, and dead bodies hanging from the trees. There was creepy music playing, recordings of screams, and dimly lit scenes of werewolves, vampires, and stuff. Joe leaned over and assured me that it gets much better. We came to a fork in the trail. The driver turned off to the right when I could clearly see fresh tractor tracks going off to the left. It was dark, but the beams of the tractor's headlights were enough for me to see the trail when I looked down at the ground. So, it was clear to me that the driver was going a different way than usual. As we rode deeper into the woods, the creepy music faded away, and there were no more decorations or scary scenes in the trees. It was just a dark forest. Joe nudged me, nodding his head. He was excited. He told me it's going to get really scary now. I tried to position myself to see ahead of us, following the light from the tractor. But suddenly, the driver switched off the lights. We were in pitch blackness and could hear nothing but the roar of the engine. To me, something felt really off. Red flags were going up in my head, and I sobered up pretty quickly. We kept going, much deeper into the woods, I'm guessing a mile or so, though we were moving slowly. Nothing scary happened, and we couldn't really talk to each other without shouting. So, we all just sat there, peering into the darkness, waiting for something to jump out at us. Then, the tractor stopped moving, and the engine shut off. No one said a word. We could hear the forest wildlife, and the moon gave off enough light so that we could make out shadows of the trees. I looked back at where the driver sat on the tractor, but he was gone. I was feeling vulnerable in the middle of the woods, in the dark, not knowing what was going to happen next. It was definitely unsettling. Then, a gunshot rang out, startling all of us. A man's voice in the distance told us it was the start of hunting season, and that we were to be hunted like animals. We were ordered to get out of the wagon and run and hide. He said this was no prank. This was no Halloween hayride. This was real. At first, no one really moved. One of Joe's buddies, Mike, snickered under his breath, wondering if that guy was for real. He climbed off the wagon and ran off. I think he was the first one to go. Joe was sitting next to me, and he was breathing hard, like he'd already been running. He nudged me again and whispered that he was getting the hell out of there. He stood up, clumsily made his way off the wagon in the dark, and took off out of sight. Another guy jumped off and disappeared. And then another. It was weird. I didn't really believe the guy with the gun. It was a show or something. But soon, there were only a few of us still left on the wagon, and another gunshot echoed in the woods. It seemed louder and closer than the first one. The man's voice reminded us that this wasn't a game, and that we'd better do something to save ourselves, or we'd die right where we were sitting. I did not like the situation I was in. Not at all. If it was a game, I didn't want to play. And if somehow this was actually real, well, I wasn't sure what to do about it. So, I jumped off the side of the wagon and started jogging, moving carefully in the dark, back down the trail we'd come from. I figured I'd just walk back to the festival and give Joe hell for picking a shitty hayride when he got back. Not far down the trail, I heard rustling sounds getting closer, then heavy footsteps, and then someone chasing me. I wasn't moving very fast in the dark, and out of nowhere, I got tackled to the ground. The asshole made a comment that I'd better do something better than this if I wanted to live, and then he took off. The fall had banged my knee up, and I was pretty mad about it. But I had to admit, it wasn't a typical hayride. Like, you don't usually get chased and shoved to the ground. I decided I did not want to participate in whatever this was. But then I heard Mike yelling. He sounded scared. He was yelling, "No, no, no." And then another gunshot came from the direction of Mike's voice. And then I didn't hear him again. It freaked me out. I was trying to be a tough guy and didn't want to believe this could be real, but I admit I was starting to get pretty nervous. I had to know what was really going on, to see if Mike was okay, so I made my way in what I thought was his direction. By now, I had pulled out my cell phone and was using the flashlight. I thought it was stupid, at this point, to try and hide. While I walked, I could hear commotion, shouting, people running. Yet another gunshot. Something was going on. I came up on a small clearing between some trees, close to where I thought Mike had been yelling, and spotted what looked like blood on the ground. A lot of blood. And it looked like someone had been dragged off, too. I could see the skid marks that looked like a person's feet being dragged. Then Joe was yelling my name. He sounded far away, but he was telling me to turn off my phone and hide. He shouted that Mike was dead and to get the hell out of there. Then he screamed. Literally screamed like a girl. I heard a crash in the woods. I called out his name, but he didn't answer. It was crazy. I was halfway pissed off, believing it to be some kind of prank, and halfway scared shit. I turned off my phone light and quietly made my way to the edge of the trail that led back to the farm. I stayed hidden in the woods several feet back from the trail, but followed it for quite a ways. Behind me, I continued to hear shouts, sinister-sounding laughter, more gunshots. I mean, it sounded pretty bad. Maybe I should have stayed to try to help the other guys. And I kept wondering about Joe and Mike. Were they really dead? My brain had a hard time believing that. I'd need to see it to believe it. Anyway, it felt like I'd been walking for at least a half hour before I saw lights up ahead, coming from one of the scary scenes the farm had set up. I'd made it to the fork in the trail. And that's when I heard a tractor coming. I was relieved and thought it must be another hayride driving through a real one. But it was coming from behind me. So I moved off the trail and hid behind a tree. As it got closer, I saw the tractor's headlights shining through the trees, and I could hear people laughing. I stayed hidden and waited. It was maybe 10 yards away when it stopped, and the driver shut off the engine, but left the lights on. He mumbled something, and then I heard Joe calling for me. He shouted that it was okay, It was all a setup. Mike's okay, and I should get back on the wagon. Still, I hesitated. Then, Mike hollered out too, so I stepped out onto the trail. Joe and Mike jumped down from the wagon, while a lot of the other guys were laughing. As I reached them by the wagon, I could see that everyone was there. Everyone was fine. And I punched Joe in the gut, hard. He doubled over, laughing through the pain. It turns out that the farm offers these themed Halloween hayrides. You have to buy the tickets in advance and sign a special waiver so they aren't liable if you get hurt. But they shoot blanks. It was fake blood, and once they capture someone, that person is told what to do so that the others don't find out it's fake yet. Joe obviously knew about this in advance, but didn't tell the three of us. There were others on the wagon who also didn't know. And from what I heard, their stories were much better than mine. Many of them actually believed 100% that it was real, were terrified, and experienced quite a bit more action and scares than I did. Joe and the other guys ribbed me for a long time because I just left. I didn't try to rescue them. It was hard to stay mad at Joe about this whole fiasco. But I haven't gone on a Halloween hayride since then. If you are enjoying the videos on my new channel and would like to see more, please like, subscribe, and comment below. I also encourage you to send in your well-written true stories. I will continue to keep bringing you the very best true story videos. Thank you.